a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, "I have just bought a field, and I must go and see it. Please excuse me." Another said, "I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and am on my way to try them out. Please excuse me." Still another said, "I just got married, so I can't come." The servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servant, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." "Sir," the servant said, "what you ordered has been done, but there is still room." Then the master told his servant, "Go out to the roads and country lanes and make them come in, so that my house will be full. I tell you, not one of those men who are invited will get a taste of my banquet."
In an exegetical expository teaching on that passage in Luke 14, A.W. Pink wrote the following. "Now then, here is the truth. God has spread the feast, but the fact is that nobody is hungry, and nobody wants to come to the feast, and everybody makes an excuse to keep away from the feast. And when they are bidden to come, they say, 'No, we do not want to,' or 'We are not ready yet.' Now God knew that from the beginning, and if God had done nothing more than spread the feast, every seat at his table would have been vacant for all eternity. I have no hesitation in saying there is not one man or woman in this church tonight, but who made excuses time after time before you first came to Christ. You were just like the rest. You made excuses. So did I. And if God had done nothing more than just spread the feast, every chair would have been vacant. Therefore, what do you read in that parable in Luke 14? Because the feast was not furnished with guests, God sent forth his servants. Oh, put your glasses on. It does not say servants. It says God sent forth his servant and told him to compel them to come in, that his feast might be furnished with guests. And there is not a man or woman in this church tonight or in any other church that would ever sit down at the marriage supper of the Lamb unless you had been compelled to come in, and compelled by God. Well, you say, what do you mean by compelled? I mean this, that God had to overcome the resistance of your will. God had to overcome the reluctance of your heart. God had to overcome your loving of pleasure more than loving of God, your love of the things of this world more than Christ. I mean that God had to put forth his power and draw you. And if any of you know anything of the Greek or have a Strong's Concordance, look up that Greek word for draw in John 6:44. No man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him. It means use violence. It means to drag by force. There is not a Greek scholar on earth that can challenge that statement. I mean, and back it up with proof. It's the same Greek word that is used in John 21, when they draw the net to the land full of fishes. They had to pull with all their might, for it was full of fishes. They had to drag it. Yes, my friend, and that is how you were brought to Christ. You may not have been conscious of it. You may not have known inside yourself what was taking place. But every last one of us was a rebel against God, fighting against Christ, resisting his Holy Spirit. And God had to put forth almighty power and overcome that resistance and bring us to our knees. And if any of you object to that strong language, then I am here to tell you, you do not believe in the teaching of this book on the absolute depravity of man. Man is lost, and man is dead in trespasses and sins by nature. Listen, it is not simply that man is sick and needs a little medicine. It is not simply that man is ignorant and needs a little teaching. It is not simply that man is weak and needs a little hope. Man is dead, dead in trespasses and sins, and only almighty power from heaven can ever resurrect him and bring him from death unto life. That is the gospel I believe, and I do not preach the gospel because I believe the sinner has power in himself to respond to it. Well, you say, then what is the use of preaching the gospel if men are dead? What is the use of preaching it? I will tell you. Listen, here was a man with a withered hand, paralyzed, and Christ says, "Stretch forth thine hand." It was the one thing that he could not do. Christ told him to do a thing that was impossible in himself. Well, then you say, why did Christ tell him to stretch forth his hand? Because divine power went with the very word that commanded him to do it. Divine power enabled him to. The man could not do it of himself. If you think that he could, you are ready for the lunatic asylum. I don't care who you are. Any man or woman here who thinks that the man was able to stretch forth his paralyzed arm by an effort of his own will is ready for the lunatic asylum. How can paralysis move? Well, I give you something stronger than that. You need something strong today, and you need something more than skim milk. You need strong meat if ever you are going to be built up and grow and become strong in the Lord and the power of his might. Here is a man who is dead and buried, and his body has already begun to corrupt so that it stank. There he was in the grave, and someone came to that graveside and said, "Lazarus, come forth." And if that someone had been anyone else than God himself manifest in flesh, he might have stood there till now, calling, "Come forth." What on earth was the use of telling a dead man to come forth? None at all, except the one who spoke that word had the power to make that word good. Now then, my friends, I preach the gospel to sinners not because I believe the sinner has any power at all in himself to respond to it. I do not believe that any sinner has any capacity in himself whatever. But Christ said, "The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life." And by God's grace, I go forth preaching this word because it is a word of power, a word of spirit, a word of life. The power is not in the sinner. It is in the word, when God the Holy Spirit is pleased to use it. And my friends, I say in all reverence, if God told me in this book to go out and preach to the trees, I would go. Yes, sir. God once told one of his servants to go and preach to bones, and he went. I wonder if you would of God. Yes, that has a local application as well as a future interpretation prophetically.